Hello, and thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. My name is Kara, and I'm a holistic health practitioner for both people and pets. After working for years in the conventional medicine field, I realized that while our lifespans may be getting longer, our health spans are rapidly shrinking. And when it comes to our pets, both their length and quality of life are decreasing. When I turned to functional medicine and a more holistic approach to health, I saw dramatic improvements for my pets, myself, and my patients. Join me each week as I merge natural health for people and pets by focusing on the root cause of disease and applying raw, real remedies that you can use to improve overall wellness for every member of your family, including the furry ones. Welcome back to Raw Remedies. My guest this week is Dr. Margo Roman. She graduated veterinary school in 1978 and opened her own integrative veterinary practice, MASH, Main Street Animal Services of Hopkinton, in Massachusetts in 1983. She's been practicing medical ozone therapy for the past 22 years and microbiome restorative therapy, which is MBRT, for 13 years. And she is the supplier for Legacy Biome FMT from her 7 generations naturally reared and holistically raised dogs who have been donors for over 28,000 animals. She's been a national and international speaker on many topics of integrative medicine and is coming out with 2 books, one on veterinary medical ozone with Jill Rubin and another on microbiome in animals in 2025. I cannot wait for you all to hear this episode because holy shit, is it excellent. So let's jump in. All right, and we are back with Dr. Margo Roman. Thank you so much for coming today. We have a very loaded episode, and honestly, I want to just jump right in and ask you, what is the difference between MBRT, which is Microbiome Restorative Therapy, which is what you practice? How is that different than just an FMT?
Okay, so the backstory, literally it's the backstory of the poop. When I first started doing fecal transplants, which was in 2012, and I had been thinking about it for a long time, like probably 10 years. And then the term came out. We used to do fecal, transplantation, which was we would give a rabbit poop and you would give a pig poop, but nobody had ever done small animal poop. And so what happened was I was reading about fecal transplants in people for C. diff, and that was probably almost 20 years ago. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting that they're doing fecal, but they didn't call it FMT. So a group of gastroenterologists who I became friendly with, one of them, said they were sitting around drinking beer in 2010 at a pub and they came up with FMT. And I thought, well, that term to me was not what I want it to be. It's just not giving poop to something and letting it do what it's doing. So I thought about it for a while, how I would change it to microbiome restorative therapy, because it's not just throwing shit at something or poop at something. It's really trying to nurture the terrain, develop the terrain so that when they get the FMT portion of it, that it restores it and not just trying to see you throw it and it sticks. I want to make sure that I've got a good base to it. And so when I started developing how I was going to do this, I was doing a lot of medical ozone. And medical ozone is wonderful for getting rid of biofilm, but it's really excellent for biofilm in the mouth, and restorative dentists have been using it for years now. And I thought, well, why wouldn't I want to get rid of the location where I'm implanting? And so by removing that biofilm in that specific part of the transverse colon or in the colon before I tried to implant it seemed so scientifically logical versus putting an animal on antibiotics for a few days to try to kill everything in the gut. That makes no sense to me because there's other biofilms in the mouth and everywhere else that is not going to be affected. It's just going to be distorted. So I thought, well, I'll develop a whole program of using medical ozone to reduce the biofilm, using nutraceuticals to help develop the terrain so that when the microbiome gets in there, it's all happy and wanting to live and thrive and mix in with the other species. So that's how the term came about. And FMT is part of MBRT, but I think MBRT is a way better way to get success because you're going to be doing something that's going to support the gut at the same time you're implanting material.
I love that. It's all encompassing. I almost think of it like how you have a medical model, right? Then there's specific aspects within the model. Each is its own thing. Each is very important, but it all comes together to form this entire model or framework that you're following. This kind of makes sense to me in that way, where it's one piece of the puzzle, but you have to have all the other pieces of the puzzle, or else it's just not going to come together perfectly at the end.
Well, that's the hope. That's the hope. And, it's like when I
Yeah.
talk to people about herbs and, giving one portion of an herb, but not giving the entourage effect of the herb and the different parts of the plant and everything else.
Yeah.
You get part of it, but I want as the maximum amount. And if I dog is eating Purina dog chow and I'm not, and then you throw fecal at it, it's not something that's going to thrive. You need to have the nurture, the base, the raw, the fresh, and no glyphosate, no chemicals that are going to kill the microbiome. So if you
Yeah.
give capsules and you think it's just going to restore it all, I'm sad that I can't tell people that's going to happen.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of the reason why I have heard people say, like, oh, I did it and it worked for a little while, and then I had to do it again. And I have actually had people tell me that they have done FMT, so just the capsules, for lifelong for an animal. And I'm like, you shouldn't have to be doing that. But the problem is if we're introducing these beneficial microbes or, the FMT into a hostile environment and not nurturing it, of course, we can't expect it to stick around and stay, right? They'll be like, I'm out of here. I'm clearly not
Exactly.
wanted here. No one's nurturing me. So,
No, exactly. And that's
yeah.
where people need to understand once they nurture it, and if they go ahead and put Provecto, Simparica Trio, any of these chemicals that kill the fleas and ticks and everything on the animal, it's destroying the microbiome.
Mhm.
It's just killing it, right? So
Yeah.
having, your animal taking FMT and then not getting it nurtured. The other piece that's complicating it is this, what I call Plechner syndrome, and it's an immune endocrine imbalance that Dr. Plechner talked about 40 years ago. And I didn't know about his stuff till about 25 years ago. But there's a weak IgA, it's a whole people can look at his website. It's Plechner, drplechner.com. And look at this syndrome. And what I found that certain animals that have very, very weak IgAs that are just bottom, they're at the bottom of the, not even near normal, they may need to have fecal every day, even with restorative therapy, because they just don't have the infrastructure. They don't
Yeah.
have the adrenal function, they don't have thyroid function. And if they're not being screened with these tests, they may be overlooking something that they could be nurturing at the same time, but also using, non-holistic, which is, giving them some low-level cortisone because their body can't absorb things. So it's a complicated piece that they need somebody who understands Plechner syndrome if their animal goes on the FMT and goes and just keeps relapsing and relapsing.
Yeah.
And that's where I really want to, take those cases, because if it's something very simple and they've just had antibiotics and they're dysbiotic and you give them the FMT, it's going to come back nicely. But if they are immune compromised, that is so easily disrupted. It just falls off.
So I definitely understand the availability in the administration of the FMT aspect.
Hmm.
So the actual fecal matter, be it in a capsule, or I know that some offices can actually administer it rectally for animals using like a slurry. But what about the ozone aspect then? Is that something that someone can do at home, or does it have to be in an office? Tell us about that.
Well, medical ozone therapy is wonderful. And I really got into it because of my horse. And I had a horse who I rescued at 16 who was going to be euthanized, and spent, about 6 months resurrecting him for my daughter. And she was jumping and showing. And at 20, he got cancer. And I started treating him holistically with all the alternative ways that I know, with homeopathy and herbs and everything else. And it was a cancer that usually in a year and a half kills them. And at
Yeah.
6 years, he needed his eye out. So I had gotten him through 6 years for something that usually killed him earlier than that. And
Yeah.
so at 6 years, I took him to the veterinary school to have his eye taken out, and they said he would be dead in 2.5 days or 3 days. And he lived 2.5 years getting ozone treatments. So I was giving
My
him
gosh.
ozone to reduce the inflammation in his eye and the cancer. And, it was it was like I did it because other veterinarians that I knew, like Marty Goldstein and Tina Aiken and Judah Shoemaker, said, why don't you try ozone? But nobody really knew about ozone. And so I thought, I got to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
So I went to conferences and took courses and traveled around the world, going to lectures and then giving lectures. And I was learning about medical ozone and the phenomenal pieces of medical ozone. So there are several companies that really work with veterinarians and pet owners that can get them machines that will work effectively for them, and they're listed
Yeah.
on my website. But there's Regeno 3 One Vet, there's O3 Vets, there's Promo Life. There's a bunch, and they're all listed with their websites. So, but I want all of them to be successful because the medical ozone is so important, and people can get a machine, and it doesn't really cost that much for a machine. And I use my machine all the time at home, not just
Yeah.
for, if I get a swollen toe, I'll make ozone water and soak my toe, or if my dog has an ear issue and I'm home, I'll make up some ozonated saline and rinse the ear. I do use it a lot at home, and then of course at our clinic we're always using it. So
Hmm.
doing ozone, I think, totally potentiates the possibility of the implant staying because you're getting rid of biofilm. And what biofilm is, it's the overgrowth of bacteria. When you wake up in the morning, you have slime in your mouth. That's
Uh-huh.
biofilm.
Yeah.
If that
Or like
biofilm
the
won't let
water dish.
it won't. It's like a
Yeah.
coating, and if that will
Yeah.
not let the new stuff come in because it's blocking it, it's going to be
Uh-huh.
hard for that fecal matter to penetrate if it doesn't get removed. So that's why in humans, when they do fecal transplants, they put them on vancomycin and metronidazole, and they make
Yeah.
people, and then they give them the fecal transplant. So you don't, you can use less of that when you do the FMTs with people,
Mhm.
but nobody in the human realms is doing the ozone and the whole support that I'm doing. And I published a paper in a human journal in 2015 describing the way I was doing it and how it was so important to utilize the ozone for what it does, which is antibacterial, antimicrobial, and
Yeah.
antiviral, antifungal, and then it forces oxygen into tissue. So what is bad with forcing oxygen into tissue when it's inflamed or it's abnormal? And so that's the whole concept of using ozone with it.
Yeah.
And again, people can learn how to do it. They've got teaching lectures from O3 Vets, and they've got Promo Life has they all have ways of explaining it to you, how to use it, and you can use it on your pets, and then you can take classes and you can use it on yourself. And I'll tell you, during COVID, I was using it on myself all the time. I
Yeah.
was using it with ear insufflation and making water, cleaning my vegetables when they came in from the grocery store. Who knew who
Oh
clogged
yeah.
them? You made a big bucket of water and you threw it in there, and the vegetables last way longer because you're getting rid of some of the residues that are on there from shipping and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know they get sprayed with all kinds of stuff, and
Right.
even your organic veggies at the store, it's sitting in the bench, and then the water comes and sprays down, and all the stuff
Right.
that's in there. You're like, what is that even? So
Right. I mean,
yeah,
because it could
yeah,
have some, disinfectant in there too,
yeah,
to keep it, they don't want to get
yeah,
moldy, but ozone, what it does, it clears it and then it floods the plant with oxygen. It's like, it looks much healthier after you do it. So, I mean, but that the whole piece on with the gut is that if I can do something that is not going to hurt anything, except it's going to hurt the bacteria, it's going to hurt the viruses, it's going to kill good ones and bad ones.
Mhm.
But then it just forces oxygen into the tissue. And when you're talking about doing it in the colon, the columnar cells, which are the cells that line the colon, at the base of their crypts, so they're in the intestines, there's
Mhm.
long little crypts and stuff, and that's where all the action happens, right? But at the base of that are the stem cells of those columnar cells of the colon. So stem cells are very high in mitochondria, and ozone stimulates mitochondria. So if you have those new cells that are developing, getting oxygen pumped into them, and their mitochondria is like riffed up, all those new cells are going to be coming up to help heal the gut and help
Yeah,
the animal too as well. So anyway, that is
yeah,
what is going on with the gut. And so doing the MBRT seems like a more package of good things to do. But
yeah,
FMT will work, but MBRT, you're hedging your bets a lot better.
yeah. Longer lasting. It's not just
Yeah, and
short
the big piece
acting.
is you want good donors. You want donors. You just can't take your next door neighbor's dog who has normal stools
Right.
and start to just use, and it's possible that your next door neighbor's dog has a better microbiome than the donors that I've nurtured for 30 years. So
Yeah.
My dogs have fed raw for 30 years and 7 generations, and they have diversity that wasn't knocked out by antibiotics.
Yeah.
So to have 7 generations of dogs that never had antibiotics is really unusual. It's not. I would love to find dogs that never had antibiotics for 50, 60 years and live on a farm and have never had any pesticides on the farm and have restorative agriculture and regenerative agriculture. I mean, that would be great to find those dogs and sort of
Yeah.
utilize them too as well.
And I mean, I'm sure they exist in some places. So I think the best example we can give is the oldest living dog, right? What was his name?
Mhm.
Bodie or
Well,
ah,
there was Bramble, who was the plant-based dog, and then there was the guy in Portugal, and then there was a guy in Australia. And I tried to reach to them, and I said, I want some of your dog's poop. I want to inoculate my dogs with your dog poop, and
yeah,
get my dogs to live to 30, you know, or
yeah,
to 21 or whatever.
yeah,
I think that's how we have to look at it is trying to get getting the animals to live longer. And it's sad because the commercial, one of the commercials says your dog lives to 10. You think it's great. They used to live 17. I mean, that was like,
yeah.
16, 17 was getting old, not 10.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
very
I mean, the
discouraging.
lifespan of golden retrievers, the average back in the late 90s used to be 17. Now the average is 12. Their lifespan has decreased by 25% in 20 years. What the hell is going to happen in another 20 years?
I know. I mean, we can go on with that whole pot. That can be a podcast that could last for about 2 days of what could be doing it.
I
But it
know.
is it is what they eat. It is the
Yeah.
destruction of their
Yeah.
microbiome. Their
Yep. What we're
microbiome is
exposed to.
so damaged by
Yeah.
the preservatives and the chlorine and the glyphosate and the
Yep.
over vaccinations and the
Yep.
pesticides and the herbicides and the cleaning products in your home and
Yep.
all those things,
Everything.
which is really, when I lectured on this in 2004 at the AVMA convention on a green sustainable building a building, a veterinary clinic green and sustainable, and how to care for your animals green and sustainable. And it was very odd to talk about that 21 years ago. Now people really want to be clean and making sure that they're not giving over pesticiding their yard and everything.
Right.
But a lot of people don't care. They just want a green lawn. They don't care if it's got glyphosate Roundup in it. They don't care.
Yeah, I know. I've had to have that conversation with a lot of people. And it's funny, I remember years ago, I bought my first house and I had like weeds and, different kinds of grasses. And I remember my grandparents came over and my grandma looked at it and she goes, honey, that looks terrible. You should really get your lawn sprayed to get rid of all the weeds. And I was like, Grandma, that crap is toxic. I don't want that on my lawn, right? But we don't think about it anymore. We just think like, oh, we want this beautiful rectangular patch of unbroken green. Well, what is that doing to
Exactly.
not just the grass and the soil, but then of course to us and every animal that walks by and steps on it, the squirrels that scuttle over it and then climb my tree, and the birds, and I mean everything. It and the water and the runoff, and I mean, girl, you're right. We could talk about this for like 5 straight days, but
Right,
so
exactly. And that's where, with my dogs, we live on 7 acres of virgin woods. And
yeah,
we built our house green and sustainable 43 years ago. So everything's organic. I mean, so, I'm kooky. I mean, I admit it. I mean, I didn't want to build a house that was, and it was hard back then finding products that didn't have
yeah,
formaldehyde in them and didn't
I'm
have,
sure.
and paints that didn't have high VOCs and
Yep,
arsenic in the deck wood. We had to put borax and do our own soaking the wood to build the deck. I mean, it was a lot of work doing that. But
yep,
now it's not. Now you can find green products everywhere. But it's the amount of plastic too that we utilize and feed our animals from, and
yeah,
packaging that all this stuff comes in is all plastic and everything else. So I mean,
yep.
there's just so much stuff that is tainting our food sources, both for humans and animals.
You're absolutely right. Even so, like in my house, I feed raw all six of my animals. They all get raw now.
Hmm.
And the cats, it's a little bit easier with the cats because the chubs and the different things, they do come in plastic. And but then when I'm thawing to feed them, I separate it into glass containers.
Hmm.
And they eat so much less that it's easy. Well, for the dogs, I DIY for them, and I have 3 dogs, and I feed them once a day, and I prep once a month. So that's 90 containers. I can't both afford, nor do I have the space for 90 stackable glass containers
Well,
full
that's
of a pound and a
I
half
bought
of
an
raw
extra
food.
freezer and refrigerator
Right.
because of
So
it. Yeah.
So their food is in plastic containers, right? And so that's one thing that is actually a future goal that I have for myself, to have the space to slowly collect stainless steel and glass containers that are going to be long lasting. As it stands, the way I try to make up for it is I replenish them yearly so that I'm not at least wearing them out until all the microplastics are releasing. But
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's
Oh,
hard.
it's
We
hard.
live in a world of
I switched
convenience.
over, I don't know, about 10 years ago because I just said I can't, I was just using, different containers that were food grade, that were good quality.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it's just I bit it, not bit the bullet, but, paid the money and just did it. And it's worked out.
Yeah.
You keep reusing them over and over and over and over and over
Yeah.
again, and they break
Exactly.
occasionally, and that you don't like to do.
Yeah.
But
Especially with people like me, I'm
it's
clumsy.
hard. It's hard for ourselves. Everything comes in
Yeah.
plastic. To
Yeah.
seek out ketchup in glass is hard. And I think, it's hard to find it.
The other day I was at the store with my husband and we needed like mustard or something for a recipe, and we don't use mustard. I don't like mustard, so it's
Mhm.
never in the house. And he grabs one off the shelf and I was like, "No, no, no." And I put it back and I grabbed the one next to it and he was like, "That one's $1 more. Why are you getting that one?" I said, "Because it's in glass."
Yeah.
And I would rather get it in glass than in plastic. And then we had this whole conversation in the middle of the aisle about why glass is better than plastic. But
Well, no, I mean, 'cause you wonder because there's all this vinegar and stuff that causes stuff to leach out, right? So,
Mhm.
I like the same thing with the ketchup and the mustard. I buy the organic in the mustard that's organic in glass, and it is more expensive.
Yeah.
But, anyway, we're off the MBRT part. But part of it is, we want to make sure that we're giving a quality microbiome. So giving
Right.
just an FMT from dogs that have been screened with with testing, which is important to know if they've
Mhm.
ever or have been proven, which is really also important. But keeping track of their parasite situation or whatever. But we never
Yeah.
know, even with when people go, well, do you know if this dog is going to come down with something that my dog could get? Nobody knows that. I mean, when you get a blood transfusion, do you know if that person is going to come down with cancer 6 months from now? No,
No?
you don't know that. So you don't know, but knowing that you've got generational protection, that we've done this for 30 years, and my
Yeah.
dogs do get cancer. That my dogs get cancer, and if I could figure out the cure for it, I would win a Nobel Prize. But
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard to give them high quality of life with cancer. So that's one of the reasons we use our dogs for cancer cases, because they've learned to live with cancer for 7 years with a cancer that normally gets them in a year and a half. So
Mhm.
if 52% of dogs are getting cancer, I would rather them have a microbiome that knows how to navigate that high percentage of opportunity of cancer. And just recently, we've been doing what we call microbiome mixology, where we'll take my dogs, and she's passed away, but we have the next generation that now she doesn't have her cancer now, but she does have mammary cancer too because we took it off, but she still has it. She still, when you have cancer, you still are there. And her knowledge of understanding cancer, I want her to go 7.5 years like her great grandmother, did.
Mhm.
I mean, I really want. So we mix it with the puppies who have no symptoms of anything, and they're healthy dogs, and get this microbiome mixology, which I think is really a clever way to introduce an experienced microbiome with the young vitality of a young microbiome. And that's what you get with legacy biomes microbiome because it's a mixture of all of the generations
Yeah.
when you buy their products. And then we sell it differently in that we sell it frozen. And I think the less processing that you do, the better the vitality of the product is. So doing
Yeah.
a live transfer to me is the best, right? And then
Yeah.
if it's been previously frozen, when we try to freeze our stuff within 24 hours, that's the next best, and then the freeze drying is the next one. So having the highest quality, we only sell to veterinarians. Our clinic does
Mhm.
because of the veterinary board sitting on my neck, going, "You can't do any of this stuff," kind of thing. So we only sell to veterinarians, and then Legacy Biome is buying all of our fecal material now, and they
Yeah.
sell to the public and to veterinarians.
He listed some of the reasons why the legacy biome, that is, you said 7 generations now, your dogs, right,
Yes. Hmm.
is superior, right? So no antibiotics, they're naturally reared, they're fed raw, minimal vaccines, if any, right?
Yeah, well, they all got a distemper and parvo as
Mm.
older puppies, like 12 weeks to 14
Yeah.
weeks. And then we've been titering them for 7 generations. So that's all
Excellent.
they've gotten. So
Love
the
that.
great
Love
great
that.
grandmother, she died at 15.
Yeah.
She still had antibodies from one distemper shot
Yep.
as a puppy. Still had
Amazing.
high antibodies. Still had
Yeah.
antibodies for rabies after 2 vaccinations, and we didn't vaccinate her more because she ended up with the cancer. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not giving her
Yeah.
a rabies vaccine if she has really high antibodies. What is the
Right.
logic of that, right? So
Yeah.
that's one of the issues I'm standing up with right now with the Massachusetts Veterinary Board. They
Yeah.
want us to give a rabies vaccine even if the animal is not healthy.
Which it says right in the insert, not meant for animals who are ill, right? It only meant for healthy animals. It says it right there.
And it says it, and it also says if the animal's not healthy,
Uh-huh.
then they may not even have an immune response to the vaccine. So you're wasting the
Yeah.
vaccine anyway.
Yep.
But the
Yeah.
point is that if you know the animal has high antibodies, that's what they use to export dogs to Australia, New Zealand, and
Uh-huh.
Hawaii, and rabies-free countries and states.
Yeah.
So why would we honor that? And if your animal has 5 times more antibodies than it needs to be exported, and then this town is requiring you to get a rabies vaccine, when one of my dog, the great aunt of the dogs now, she got a rabies vaccine. Within a month, went into complete liver failure, and she ended up dying. And so she was not even 2.5 years old, and it was terrible. And I knew that when I gave it to her, I said, she's got antibodies. Why am I doing this? It's the
Yeah.
law. You have to do it. It's the law.
Yeah.
And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars trying to save her. And
Yeah.
I still beat myself up. Like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? I knew better, but I had to follow the law, and the law needs to change. If
Yes.
we have antibodies and we have
Right.
protecting an animal, there's no reason we should be forced as veterinarians to go against our veterinary oath and do something unethical, which is to hurt the
Yep.
animal. And I
Yep.
think that's why I'm standing up to the veterinary board right now. And they can't just vaccinate it. Well, I am, after experiencing that with my own dog and
Yeah.
traumatized, it's like I have post-traumatic stress disorder over it. So when I hear about an animal that has got cancer and autoimmune, and they're forcing the dog to get a vaccine because the veterinarian's afraid of the law, who are they loyal to? The law or to their oath?
Right.
Their oath is to take care of the animal and not to do something that's not. I mean, we have the science to show what we have, but they don't want to read it.
Well, and that makes you kind of wonder, and I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but if
Yeah.
you look at law versus science, right? So let's use veterinarians and also healthcare workers for people as an example.
Hmm.
So veterinarians get their rabies series, and
Right.
then they don't get a booster every year. If they get bitten, scratched, attacked, whatever by an animal, they test their antibody levels. If they have appropriate antibody levels, they don't get a booster. If they don't have appropriate antibody levels, they do get a booster. Same thing for healthcare. So I have a history in the emergency department. And so if any workers in the hospital had an occupational exposure, blood or body fluids, they got
Hmm.
stabbed with a needle, a patient, I don't know, got blood in their eye, they would have to come down to the ER. And one of the things I would do is I would send off blood to check for hepatitis B because to work in healthcare, you have to have hepatitis B vaccine. If your antibody level is a certain number, you didn't need to get a booster. If your antibody level was below a certain number, I would have to call them back and say, hey, you're below this number. We recommend getting a booster. And they would come back and they would get their booster, right? But we didn't just give it to everybody. You test and you see. So I find it very interesting that that's acceptable for humans. But
Well,
then
I
when we
mean,
talk
don't
about
agree with
doing it for an animal, it's not acceptable. So where is that coming from?
that is coming from, I think, an ignorance to understand that the titering numbers, they're saying that nobody has said in a peer-reviewed documented piece that a titer of this will protect an animal with a full challenge of rabies. Even though Gene Dodd did the Rabies Challenge Fund, and they were able to document dogs being challenged at 5 years and being fine. And so they don't want to take that because somebody has to repeat that. And none of the vaccine companies want to spend, they spent over $1 million doing the rabies challenge to do
Yeah.
it on a big scale for an industry to sell vaccines, a third of the amount of vaccines, and spend millions of dollars, probably now $6 million or so, to test it to see if it would go out that way. They don't, why would they do that? That's like stupid. I mean, they're
Yep.
not going to make any money from it. I mean, even if they sell the vaccine for twice the amount, it's still going to not come out. They'll never make any money on it. So why would you do it? So we're getting off track here on the microbiome, but you want to protect your animal's immune system,
Yeah.
and that's part of it, is protecting the microbiome. And the microbiome is 80% of the immune system.
Yeah.
80%. So if we're talking about what's the biggest bang that you can do for your dog, is protect the immune system. And so with
Right.
all I've been practicing 48 years now, and it's crazy that if I can get something so simple as poop that dogs eat anyway, and get them a higher level of immune stimulation from their own gut for
Yeah.
something as simple as fecal transplants, oh
Yep.
my God, how amazing was that? It's like,
Yeah.
and we
It's a
keep
no-brainer.
don't eat that. I don't want them eating some dog who's, eating kibbles and bits or something like that. I don't want
Right.
my dogs eating poop. They don't particularly eat poop, but at all. I mean, they'll dig holes and eat dirt out here and dig up,
Mhm.
roots and chew on, pull things from the ground and stuff.
Yeah.
But but I want them to do all that. It's interesting
Yeah.
how they gravitate to these rotted trees, and they'll
Mm.
dig into them and eat the mycelium in the tree because it's like rotting, and there's bacteria and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I love
she
that. If they're
yeah,
they're self-selecting for their microbiome.
exactly. It's what's the term is the right term. So you'll see a certain time of the year, they like I growing it right now in front here is winter rye, and they graze like little goats. They'll graze on the grasses, and they love it. So it's
Yeah.
and I know we're doing raw, but my dogs have been raw I started doing raw about 35 years ago, and I was one of the first veterinarians in the United States to do raw diet, and I love that it has to. I think that it should be raw if we're feeding it, but I've
Yeah.
also now increased the amount of plant-based
Mhm.
material because of the sustainability and the compassion component. And
Yeah.
we could talk about that, but that's that. But my dogs get both, so they get raw. They
Mhm.
get raw. They used to get raw goat milk, but I can't get it now. And they get raw egg. They get mostly raw venison from hunting season,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
some raw offal, from Almost Pride. I use Almost Pride,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they get
Great stuff.
the chicken gizzards and the beef liver and stuff like that. So they get some of that mixture and tripe, but
Yeah.
they used to get, a lot of it. Now they get enough to feed the microbial population. So
Mhm.
they get, a teaspoon of the tripe or a tablespoon of the tripe, not like half a tube of tripe, which they would
Yeah.
love to eat half a tube of tripe.
And some animals do really great with that and with tripe,
Mhm.
and some animals do not. I've seen some people where they're like, "Oh yeah, once a week I feed only a meal of tripe." In our house, if I give more than an ounce of tripe, let me tell you, the toots will clear a room.
So,
So every animal is different, but yeah, and so like it's that biodiversity. And I mean, with increasing plant matter, right? So as long as it's prepped in a way that they're able to break down the cell walls and actually absorb the nutrients, that there is just a ton of diversity, and that
oh,
you get
absolutely. And
different
the fiber,
phytonutrients, and yeah,
yeah.
the fiber, the your gut microbes love fiber, and that could be in the form of fur, could be fungi, could be plants, could be fruits, could be vegetables. So yeah, a lot of ways that you can get fiber. So I mean, and if you are cultivating an excellent gut microbiome, then I think it's excellent that you're feeding all of that fiber to that microbiome.
Yeah.
What kind of conditions can an MBRT really be beneficial for?
Okay. So the first case I did was a dog. It was a white standard poodle named Stovin, and he had been at Angel Memorial Hospital for 3 years. and he'd been on antibiotic most of the time with
Oh
diarrhea.
my
He
God.
never had a normal stool. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They did uh, biopsies. They didn't know what, but then they were going to do an exploratory. Dog was down to like, 35 pounds. It was emaciated. I have pictures of him like 10 days after we started. And, I kept saying, I really want to do a fecal transplant. This dog has been on antibiotics for 3 years. I mean,
Yeah.
what's left after metronidazole for 3 years and amoxicillin for 3 years, right?
Nothing.
Nothing is left. And so we started him back with all the different things that I do with nutrition and probiotics and digestive enzymes and
Mm-hmm.
homeopathy. And we got him from being almost a bag of bones, can't even stand, to standing. And then I said, I really want to do a fecal transplant for his gut. And it was like, he was going up, and then it went like this.
Yeah.
And I have pictures of him before and after, and it's just amazing. It was like he's this solid, meaty boy who's got all this energy. But he turned out to be, a atypical Addisonian, and they
Oh,
hadn't picked that up. And that's one of the complications of the microbiome. With if they don't have absorption and they have both Plechner syndrome and Addison's disease, you can't manage them. They're too
yeah.
there's no absorption, and then their adrenals don't work in both
Yeah.
ways. So those are complicated cases, and those, people need guidance. They can't just I don't think do those at home very well.
Yeah.
But in any case, I started doing it for diarrhea and started doing it for dogs that had chronic GI problems. And I had a bunch of cases, but the next ones were these two wire hair fox terriers, oh gosh, Archie and Agatha, and they were siblings, and
Cute.
they bought them to be best friends. Well, they killed each other. They were trying to kill
Oh,
each other. He was trying to sit on top of her and rip her throat out,
oh my
and
God.
had diarrhea all the time, and he could only eat tripe. That was it. He had one meal, and
Hmm.
that was tripe. Otherwise, he had diarrhea. So I wanted to give him the fecal transplant for the diarrhea, and I gave him the fecal transplant. And 2 days later, he is grooming his sister, cleaning her ears, loving her, looking at her like, "Where have you been all
Uh-huh.
my life?" And he had normal stools. He could eat any protein he wanted. He was happy and playful, and his stopped itching. And it was like, oh my God, just from poop and oxygen, ozone. So I started to try it on another case with behavior. And all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden, these dogs who were aggressive were becoming sweet. And I realized that my theory was precursors for oxytocin, which is the love hormone, must be coming from the gut, because he was acting like a female dog who loves his babies, loves her babies, and grooming them and cleaning her face. And the owner was like, she worked at Mass General Hospital, and she's like, "What is this?" She said, "I can't believe what has happened to these two dogs, because they this is what I wanted when I bought two puppies from the same litter, thinking they would love each
Yeah.
other. They've been trying to eat each other." So anyway, so those were some of the beginning ones. So behavior, amazing.
Yeah.
Anxiety, amazing. Um, allergies, absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So if you can do it for allergies, but again, just giving FMT and not changing the diet, not doing, if you're going
Right.
to hand over these microbes into the gut and you're not doing the nurturing that you need to protect them and protect the dog, then it's not going to last. So and so that's where, having a vet who's holistic, who gets it, and versus just somebody who's just going to, you're going to get improvement with just FMT. But
Mm-hmm.
I want people to get their animals to be cured, or to
Mm-hmm.
not keep, every other month having them relapsing.
Right.
And that may take somebody who has additional training and has an open mind.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that they may not be able to navigate it either, because they don't know ozone, they don't know UVBI. These are all things that work with the immune system to try to balance it more.
I mean, I've seen evidence of that even in my own house, and it was not with FMT, but with my cats.
Hmm.
It took a while to switch them to raw. They were older, they were resistant, and we got there eventually. And within a few months of eating raw food, absolutely nothing processed, no processed treats, no kibble, no nothing. My cat, who at that point was 8, now she's 9, went from 8 years of being antisocial, hiding, didn't like to be touched, wouldn't come near me, no affection. Now she sits in my lap, she purrs, she headbutts me. It is so cute. And
Mm.
I know that that change came from helping to repair her gut microbiome simply from removing all of the processed food and all of the glyphosate that food was. I can't even call it food actually because it's feed, right? It's not even food grade, it's feed grade. So all of the ultra processed crap that I was feeding her that was, heavily laden with pesticides and was wiping out her gut microbiome. Now all I did was give her gut the chance to help restore itself by feeding her a species appropriate diet. And that improved her
Mm.
anxiety and her mood because now she's probably making serotonin as a postbiotic because she has, appropriate gut flora and all of these other things. And so it can be such a big change if you even just switch the diet can be a big change. But
Oh,
then if you
absolutely.
add an FMT on top of that, and that putting together is the MBRT. It's just
Right.
two components, and that's what that longevity does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I agree. Like they always said, you are what you eat, and you are what you don't excrete. So if you keep all this
Hmm.
chemicals in your system, how can your body navigate? Because you're killing off species
Right.
that need to be there to help you navigate.
There are other companies I know that exist
Hmm.
that offer FMT pills.
Hmm.
Now, I personally won't use those companies and I don't recommend those companies because it's hard to know exactly where they're getting their fecal matter from.
Hmm.
And so, what are the things that somebody might want to ask if they're looking to get, if they're not doing it through a vet, they just want to go online and purchase something and try administering the pills at home? What should they look for? Like, what questions are they asking to make sure they're getting a quality product?
Okay. So, obviously there's testing, to test the dogs and cats.
Mhm.
But it's also, to me, it's really important generational because if the mother or grandmother or great grandmother or great great grandmother was on antibiotics, she never passed it to them because you've got that whole vaginal gulp that happens when they're born and they pass that on if they were
Yep.
born by C-section. And that's why so many Frenchies have such bad skin, have such bad issues. They're all born by
Yeah.
C-section. They
Yep.
never get anything passed down generation after generation after generation. And they do amazing with our fecal transplants as the Frenchies because we're giving them, 30 years past when they weren't
Yeah.
very popular as a breed. We're giving them that microbiome back that they have been deprived for maybe 10
Generations. Yeah.
generations worth of animals, right? So
Yeah.
it's really important for them to get the healthy microbiome. Animal Biome, which is the main company, and I'm so grateful that they came out in a big way, but they only used ours in the beginning, and then
Hmm.
they got so big that they started to reach out into the Oakland area and test
Hmm.
dogs and cats, and want to get more volume because I don't have huge volumes because I only have we have 10 dogs that we
Yeah.
harvest from and two cats, and now we have another cat now, so
You
we
can
don't
only get
have
so
a lot.
much poop.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
and we are I'm very careful. If it's not exactly what I want, if it's sitting around, we didn't get it processed, we just try to keep it a certain very high level
Yeah.
of processing days and hours and all that kind of stuff. And so, we make up stuff for Legacy Biome, and we were shipping it next day air to Animal Biome, and they decided that they needed to go much bigger. And so their
Mhm.
criteria was they had to be off antibiotics for 1 year. And to
Mhm.
me, that is good that it's off 1 year, but what happened to all the other stuff that may
Yeah.
have never gotten there and then they were on antibiotics, right? So I
Yeah.
question that, and I want them to be successful because they're doing such great work exploring and explaining and researching the microbiome. And it's important that the big companies like Hills and Purina, who both condemned me for talking about microbiome 20 years ago and said and threatened to arrest me to going to a lecture on raw diet
Mhm.
when I Tufts. And so now they're all into microbiome, which it's
Yeah.
so odd to me, or not odd, but it's great that science has caught up to the theories of these holistic vets that felt that this was wrong to feed heavily processed food,
Yeah.
and so it's important that these companies, both Purina and hills appreciate that these animals that are protected for generations have value.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, the research needs to come from somewhere and you need the funding for that research. And I think that's great. But at the end of the day, I know that when I'm choosing a product for my dogs, like my golden retriever who just shoved his head in my face, I want to choose the absolute best quality supplement or product.
mhm.
And for me, that means no antibiotics, not over vaccinated, not exposed to flea and tick chemicals,
Mhm.
not from a kibble fed dog, right? I want this to be from naturally reared, generational, raw, clean diets, clean environment and everything. And that is why if I were to have to use something, which I have not, but
Mhm.
Legacy Biome is what I would choose
Yeah.
for myself, well, for my dogs. Hopefully I never am in the situation where I need a
Well, I
microbiome
think eventually
transplant.
it's going to be that way with humans. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
saying that for years that they're going to find that certain. I mean, just recently there was an article that one of my clients sent to me because we do it for all our cancer cases. Because if I can
Yeah.
give a healthy immune system to an animal that has never had any kind of insult to someone who's been on antibiotics and has cancer, I
Yeah.
use that. But there was a paper, I mean, it was, I guess, on one of the news show, that a guy who had colon cancer and was not responding and was doing really poorly. And they
Yeah.
gave him a fecal transplant from somebody who had gone through chemotherapy successfully and was
Hmm.
healed. And the guy completely changed. They gave him fecal
Yeah.
transplant, then they treated him, and his cancer went into remission. So,
Wow.
we need research like that to show that the immune system has support from the gut flora. And if you can find out that Mrs. Jones in Topeka, Kansas has MS and someone else who has all the other
Right.
stuff, the other microbial population that helps prevent MS, and this is why now, in 2000, there was one research article on microbiome. In 2017, there were 17,000. In
Yeah.
2023, there were over 250 PubMed research articles on microbiome because
Yep.
people know this could be the magic bullet that everybody is looking for
Yeah.
that can help regenerate the immune system in animals and humans.
Yeah. Absolutely. So perfectly said. And I'm just so excited to see where that trajectory takes us.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's
so
pretty, it's good
yeah,
shit. It's good stuff.
it is good shit, girl. So tell everybody how they can find you and find
So,
your legacy biome.
okay, so my clinic is mashvet.com, and the MBRT.life is the website. But right now I don't have my veterinary license because I'm standing up for the veterinary oath and the veterinary board. And we're at the Supreme Court. We are standing up to the Supreme Court. And I've spent over $400,000 of legal fees to stand up for my right to make a decision on the health of an animal or health of, and I'm, as a veterinarian, we use our knowledge and skills for the protection of animals, humans, and public health. That's zoonosis. And the veterinary board in Massachusetts said, you can't do that. If you tell somebody about health, as a human, you're practicing medicine. So if an animal has giardia and I tell the owner to be careful that the animal could spread giardia, I'm practicing on humans, and therefore I'm practicing out of the scope of my practice, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. That
Yep.
every veterinarian talks about parasitic conditions or infections or whatever, and to have that taken away from us as a profession is an insult to what our oath is about or
Yeah.
veterinary medical ethics is about. So I've been standing up with that. So you cannot, I'm not practicing right now. I'm hoping everything will be reversed. So, but their veterinarians can consult to me at themashvet.com. If they have vets that want to learn how to do the microbiome restorative therapy, I'm happy to teach them. The MBRT.life has the website with that vets can order it there. Legacy
Okay.
Biome is the site at legacybiome.com, has our microbiome, and they ship both to vets and to the public. So they take it and they do their freeze drying and you can get it. But I want to encourage people to do more than just give the capsules, that they do some of the other things that we do to make that terrain a live source of of more balance, so that the microbes from my dogs get there and go, oh my God, this looks like home. This is like, oh, I can live
Let's move
here.
in.
Yeah, let's hang
Exactly.
out. So,
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Time flies when you're talking about something really exciting and
well,
cool.
it's so I'm also we're coming out with 2 books.
Oh,
Jill Rubin and I wrote a textbook on ozone therapy, and it's just been finished, and we're just waiting to get the final piece.
I can't
And then
wait.
I'm working one on microbiome restorative therapy, and I'm trying to. I should probably send all the ideas for the title, because I've got. I mean, you can go crazy thinking of crazy, titles for the book. So I've got all
Yeah.
these crazy titles. So want to just make sure it's professional and done
Yeah.
in a way that we can get people to read it and to sort of understand why this is so important and how to protect it. How do we stop damaging it with these flea and tick products? Because we have dogs that do great, and then they get Simparica trio, and it's like nothing ever would happen. They get diarrhea again. I mean, those things are so toxic to the animal and to the microbiome, and I think we need to be really waking up the public about the dangers of these pesticides.
100%. Once you know better, you have to do better. And we appreciate that you are standing up so that we have the ability to do better without consequences. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I can't wait for your book to come out. When it does, I'll adjust the show notes so that should people be reading or listening to us down the line and your book's already out, they can just click on it and grab it. And I will be putting that on my wait list.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay, take care, Karen.
Thank you for listening. Please remember that you, yes, you, are the driving force that helps keep small businesses and platforms like mine running. So if you liked what you heard, please like, share, and most importantly, rate this podcast. It's the only way we can reach more people and spread the word about natural health. None of the conditions discussed or recommendations given are meant to replace the advice of your health provider. So if you have concerns about yourself or your pets, please confer with a human or animal health practitioner. Have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you next week.